When you've gone through trauma as a child, it's in your system. Somatically, we just can't avoid it. I can't overcome my depression, or I'm having a lot of anxiety. The symptoms that you're having may be a result of the traumas that have happened in the past.
Sue Genest is a trauma and EMDR expert, director of Life Journeys Counseling and Training.
Sometimes we put these judgments on ourselves as children from the perspective we have as adults, but we didn't have that perspective back then. We didn't have the capacity back then. They think, actually, I am bad.
Something wrong with me.
Maybe I'm not lovable. One of the core things that I needed to start with is to talk about the core true self, which is love, compassion, goodness.
So there's an identity components like I am worthless, moving to wait a minute, I am lovable.
There is the possibility to heal. There is the possibility to deal with this.
Hello everyone, this is Dr. Kasim Al Mashat. I am so honored to share today's conversation with someone who has such an extensive expertise in mental health, healing, trauma, with such a large contribution to mental health, and someone who's made a positive impact on me personally and professionally. My guest today is Sue Genest, Director of Life Journeys Counseling and Training. She's a registered clinical counselor and Canadian certified counselor who's EMDRIA approved training provider for EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. And EMDRIA is just the international association. She provides basic and advanced training in EMDR and has over 34 years of experience in mental health field with 21 years of expertise in EMDR and over 20 years in somatic therapy. She has also been involved in Indigenous education, federal and provincial corrections, health educator, child worker, disability care provider, research in mental health and medical faculty, pediatrics and bioethics, and she is also involved in many spiritual and alternative practices. Sue has won numerous awards for her academic work, and she has published and presented and taught university classes in the areas of EMDR and 2SLGBTQPIA+, which is an acronym that stands for Two Spirit, Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Queer, and or Questioning Intersex, Asexual, and Plus, which reflects the countless affirmative ways in which people choose to self identify. She also has taught courses in counseling skills, lifespan development, holistic health, pediatrics, qualitative research, sexuality, and career counseling. I'm out of breath reading your bio. So, join us today as we explore a wide range of topics that impact our mental health and well being. Sue Genest, a warm welcome to you to the Pause to Elevate podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here and chat with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you are so busy, you do so many things. I don't know how you manage to do so many things, but I wonder if we can begin with what drew you to this field?
Yeah. Well, for me, and you know this from the EMDR training, I'm very open about my life journey. And it's why I call my business Life Journeys.
Mm,
We're all on a life journey. We all have a direction to go. And what really brought me to the field was my own desire and want to develop. I've Since I was a little kid, I was always fascinated in learning, but also development, healing.
mm,
So it's why I've just sort of tried everything. And I come from a background of complex trauma.
mm,
My parents had a lot of trauma in their life. I think they really did the best that they could, but there was trauma there. They didn't know how to handle different things, and
mm,
my mother has mental health issues, right? So there was a time in my life very early where I really wanted to do healing. I really wanted to
mm.
shift the things that were happening in my life. And being an empath, I felt things very strongly. Being a sensitive person, I felt things very strongly. I realized later in my life that some of the things I was feeling were the things that were in my family, that I was
Mm,
doing work for them because I felt things so strongly. So that really started my journey, is
mm,
looking for ways to heal, looking for ways to shift depression, deal with the trauma in my life. And I explored lots of different ways. And I was in talk therapy once I could afford it in my
mhm,
early 20s,
mhm,
for quite a few years. And at one point, I said to my therapist, "So feels like my head is in university. I've learned a lot. I know about assertive versus aggressive. And, I know all these things, but my body and my emotions are still in kindergarten."
mm.
And she sort of went, I and she was a bright woman. Very empathic. It was very helpful to be with her for a long time, right? But she didn't know where to take me from there. And so I started
Mm,
exploring body psychotherapies, and that gave me some more information about how distress and trauma expresses itself somatically. That was really helpful, that journey. It taught me about attachment. It taught me about early developmental trauma, but there was still things I was coping with, still
mm,
things I was struggling with. So I kept searching, tried lots of energy work that gave me different tools. And I eventually landed in the EMDR world.
mm.
And what shifted there was it cleans out the box. And that was the difference for me. I needed the other pieces. I needed the knowledge. I needed the understanding. I needed the development of self awareness. I needed all of that. I
Right.
needed those tools. But eventually, I just needed to clear the box out. And that's an ongoing journey. If you think about first responders or people who are in active duty, there's things happening to them all the time. And
Yes,
so,
reoccurring. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So those things need to be cleared out. Otherwise they start to build up. So
Mm,
it's not that it's a one time kind of event and then, oh, well, great, everything's done. And there's also, when myself coming from complex trauma, there are attachment wounds. And so there are patterns and even physiological somatic
mm,
patterns that come out of years of trauma and attachment wounds that every once in a while pop up when there's distress or injustice. And you're like, oh, there's that piece
mm,
there. How are we going to deal with this one? And I come back to things that help and work with that. So
mm,
really, your question, like, how did I come to this, is really my own personal journey. And I wanted to be able to help others with what worked for me. And
mm.
so that's what I do in my teaching, and that's what I do with my clients.
As you share your story, just remind me of this saying we have in counseling that, you can only take people as far as you're willing to go.
Yeah.
And you've gone so far truly in your own work, which is so inspiring. That's one of the things that really stood out for me. And when I was searching for EMDR trainers and heard about your story and met you, and it's like, wow, you're not just delivering something, you're actually living it. Like you are truly living this practice and the teaching. So I just wanted to thank you. I know I said this outside of recording, but I've so appreciated how you've lived your life, and you really are a beacon
Well, thank you.
of change and healing that's possible.
Yeah, there's been beacons in my life, like
Mm,
um, my Soma Hakomi trainer, Donna Martin. I felt that she really lived what she was teaching. And so
mm,
I've had mentors along the way that I've really respected that lived what they were doing. And for me, that integrity and authenticity is something that I continually strive for, that
mm.
I'm doing something that comes from my practice, not from my head or from knowledge or from just a book. Like, does this really work? And if it doesn't, then I don't want to do it. I really want to make an impact in the world in the ways that I can.
So interesting you say that, because one of the things when I began just having interest in EMDR is like, does this work? And I know we'll explain what it is, how it works for listeners who are new to this. But experiencing it myself and realizing,
Mm,
oh, this actually does work. Like besides the research and all of that, like when we
yeah,
experience something. So that's what I love about what you teach is you really experience it yourself, and you're sharing something that just works, right?
yeah,
So I want to go back to a couple of things you shared. There's so much just in the beginning of your story, and it just feels like, our past lays dormant. And you said, things happen, and you called it the box.
yeah,
And so can you say a little bit about that? What is that box of past that we all seem? I mean, we all have a past,
yeah.
and what is that lays dormant in that box?
Yeah, when we're young children, of course, our brains don't even completely develop until we're in our early 20s. So that we
Mm,
don't have all the reasoning, foresight, so we sometimes forget as adults that when we were young children, we didn't have the capacity to think in the way we do now. So
mm,
sometimes we put these judgments on ourselves as children from the perspective we have as adults, but we didn't have that perspective back then.
mm,
We didn't have the capacity back then. We had very basic capacities in our development. So when we had needs, we had to reach out for those needs.
mhm,
Infants require their caregivers to regulate. They absolutely require that. And so if you have a dysregulated parent,
mm,
you don't have any choice. You're going to have dysregulation. And so, when I was thinking about the topic that we were talking about today and some of the key points, one of the things that I really thought about was
mm,
our North American cultures is founded on Christian principles,
mm,
and there are pros and cons to that, of course.
mhm.
One of the difficulties is that we believe in this basic badness, the original sin,
Right.
and it's not something we learn in grade 1, okay, here's the script, right? It's
Mm,
it's in everything.
yeah.
Right? It's sort of like socialization, when we talk about toxic masculinity or we talk
Mm,
about, basic socialization that we need to challenge. And this is one of those. I mean, I remember hearing Pema Chodron talk about a
mm,
meeting with the Dalai Lama, and there were a number of Western healers, and they were explaining to him that the difficulty in North America is that people have a real struggle with self-esteem
yeah.
because they believe in basic badness. And he
Mm,
was surprised. He was like, "Oh, I didn't realize," because in their culture, and in many Eastern cultures, they believe in basic goodness,
yes.
right? And that's a big difference. So, what I've noticed over the years in working with individuals, whether in corrections or in my clientele, general public,
Mhm,
is one of the core things that I needed to start with, and I do it in the training as well, is to talk about the core true self, which is love,
mm,
compassion, goodness. And when I worked in corrections and the men understood that I could see their core goodness, then we could move forward.
ah,
Every setting I've ever worked in, when they understood that I genuinely could see their goodness, they were able to say, I harmed somebody and I feel terrible about it.
mm,
And I feel evil, I would hear
yeah,
often in corrections. And when we would trace, their actions back to early childhood and understand that, residential school was the beginning of their life at 5 years old, when they
mm,
understood trauma was what was, the sort of foundation or route to, trajectory to
mm,
difficulty, then they could separate trauma versus who I am as a person.
right. Yeah.
That's the metaphor I use about the sun and the clouds,
Mm,
that our true self is the sun. And inevitably, something is going to happen, whether you have the most loving parents or you have parents with trauma, something goes wrong, you know.
mm,
kids make fun of you at school or something happens. You see, you're part of a pandemic,
Mm,
world events happen, right? Things happen to us inevitably. Like the metaphor I use, where, a water bottle or a glass, it starts to fill up. And
mhm,
if it gets too full, it will start to overflow. So back to the metaphor, the sun and the clouds, as events happen to us, those are the clouds that start to cover up the sun.
right.
Um, and it gets more difficult if you've had a lot of difficulty. You've grown up, in impoverished, you were put in residential school, or you have parents with complex trauma themselves,
Mm,
or you've had to deal with racism all your life and or homophobia or what
yeah,
have you, right? All of these different things that happen.
or
We
war.
Yeah, war, you come out
Yeah,
of a war zone, or, there's all these different things that happen to us. Those start to fill up the boxes, if we're talking about the boxes of trauma,
mhm,
or fill up the glass. And if we don't deal with those, and if you don't know how to deal with those, then often what we do, or we find distractions, we try and push those aside,
mm,
avoid them, lock them up the best that we can. But it will start to surface somatically, or it'll
yeah,
start to seep through with depression or anxiety or anger or somatic illness,
mm,
different ways. It will show up in time. Sometimes that's when people end up in counseling. They're like, can you help me? I can't overcome my depression, or
mm,
I'm having a lot of anxiety, or I'm so angry and it's affecting my whole family, or what have you. These things
mm,
show up. And depending on our communities, will, you know, direct us to how we deal with some of those things. If you grow up in indigenous community, maybe they have elders and they have sweat lodges and they have
mhm,
ways to help you work through those. Or if your parents don't know how to guide you, you're left to kind of deal with that on your own and try and figure it out, right? Really, we do, I believe, anyways, that we do have basic goodness, that the core of who
mm,
we are is love and compassion. That is the sun.
mm,
It's not marred, but sometimes there can be a lot of clouds, and it can be really difficult to connect because we can't see it. There's just so much in between us and
mm,
what is our true self. And when we can start to dissolve those clouds, which EMDR does, then we get more in connection to true self.
mm. Love that metaphor because otherwise, the cloud people identify as I am that.
Yes.
I am the distress, or I am the trauma, or I am the depression. They
Yeah.
become the cloud, so to speak, and
Yeah.
you're supporting people and recognizing, no, this is something that's happened, but
Yes.
now the nervous system is reacting to it in the present moment. And I think a lot of times many people don't even recognize that what do you mean the body remembers, or the body keeps a score,
Yeah. Yeah.
like can you share a little bit about that, like how does a body remember, sometimes even if mentally we don't remember, but it's kept in our body.
Yeah. Without going into a whole bunch of neuroscience, everybody
Mhm.
goes to sleep really quickly, but um, we know that the body holds our stress. When we're in high stress, the shoulders tighten or the
Mm,
stomach tightens. Many of us are familiar with that
mhm,
somatic experience, and we do a lot of things to distract and avoid what we're experiencing. I think for a couple reasons. One is because if we're concerned about basic badness, and that may be not how the average person thinks about it, but if they
mhm.
think, actually, I am bad,
Something wrong with me.
or
Yeah.
yeah, I maybe I'm not lovable.
Mm,
Maybe I'm not. And these are very core cognitions and beliefs that we take on when we're young children. And we may not be thinking about that at the forefront when we're adults, but it's kind of in the core. And so we're
mm,
avoiding going there because the intensity of connecting to I am bad feels so bad that we
Mhm.
do everything to not connect to it. And so it's usually the place that I start. I am very open about, yeah, I came from complex trauma. I dealt with depression. I dealt with these things because I want people to know, like, normalize. Let's just get it out on the table
Yeah,
right now. Let's
yeah,
let's just normalize this. This is a human experience that when you've gone through trauma as a child, it's in your system.
yeah.
Somatically, we just can't avoid it. We know physiologically that if you've dealt with discrimination and social isolation or social
Mm,
rejection, you will have more somatic illness.
mm,
There's the ACE studies that talk about, if you've had all of these traumas, you will have illness unless you deal with that. That's the important piece. Is the second part of that is that
mm,
there is the possibility to heal. There is the possibility to deal with this. So I want people to know, one, there's actually basic goodness. The core of who
mm,
you are is good, is love, is compassion. And
mm,
secondly, there's something we can do about this.
mm.
That makes it much easier to explore the fact that you might actually have some boxes that need to be dealt with, and that some of the somatic, or, the anxiety, the depression, the symptoms that you're having may be a result of the traumas that have happened in the
Ah,
past. And it's hard to hold that if you think, gee, I might be unlovable or I might be bad. How do you hold that? You,
yeah.
you don't even want to explore it if you think that that's the answer.
Absolutely. As you're saying this, it made me think as well about other modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy that's very on the cognitive level, CBT, some people may know of it. But this is going on the nervous system level. Like it's connecting to the body as well, somatic. And there's something that has changed. I know for me and clients that I work with that weren't able to do that with CBT, just for cognitive work. And
Yeah, well, I think, there are a couple really important pieces
yeah,
that make EMDR work or that make CBT work
yeah,
well. So, and Rogers talked about that, the conditions of therapy, that
right.
you need to have, this container of warmth and empathy and non-judgment.
Mhm.
Those are the conditions, and really
Right.
those are the things I'm talking about in terms of being able to say to somebody, "Look, actually the core of who you are is love, it's goodness," right?
Mm,
That creates the container for a client to be able to start to explore.
mm,
So all of the therapies, I think, contribute and come together. Like, if you come to the EMDR training with a good clinical background of a lot of good different trainings, I think you're even more artful in
right.
your work. But setting, Dr. Francine Shapiro really said we
Mm,
need that foundation of the AIP, which is really what we're talking about, is that we understand that this isn't the person, it's what's
mm,
happened to the nervous system when you've been completely overwhelmed and your system has no way to process that.
right.
It gets stuck in the somatic system, it
Mm,
gets stuck in the body. There needs to be a way to process that. And that is what EMDR does. It uses dual attention, it uses mindfulness, which is not a new concept. Mindfulness has been
right,
around forever.
right.
Indigenous cultures use dual attention and mindfulness in drumming and dancing. So it's not a new concept. But what Dr. Francine Shapiro did was bring it to Western psychology, to research it and
Mm,
write about it, to bring it to the psychological world. But it's not really a new concept in
right.
terms of the process.
So maybe, would love to give the listeners a sense of what does this EMDR session look like. But maybe before we do that, if we just even define trauma, like what is trauma for many people? They go, oh no, I don't have any trauma, and maybe we're missing out on something that they're not recognizing because we all have something.
Yeah, one of the processes of EMDR is always enlightening to the new therapists that take it in the training, because we do a float back, which is really about, let's find out, like, if you're having a distress reaction, having symptoms that you want to get rid of, you're uncomfortable with, there's a root to that. If I talk about that
Mm,
metaphor, as you remember, the dandelion, and we can go out and mow the lawn and it looks good for a little while, but they're very hardy plants, so they pop back up. So what we do in EMDR is get to the root. And
mm,
the root always takes us to childhood, because that's where we set up our understanding of ourselves.
mm,
And there's no way around that. We all do that. We have to figure out who we are in our childhood. And if we have good attachment, we have parents who mirror us and recognize us and celebrate us,
mhm,
then we're going to get some uh, understanding of ourselves as lovable and worthwhile and good, right?
mm,
If our parents aren't capable of doing that, we just automatically question our own worthwhileness or lovability
mm.
or goodness. And if your parents are not just neglectful, but abusive
Right.
and, say harmful things,
Mm,
and are harsh with their children and abusive to their children emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually,
mhm.
what have you, then those children will take on, really, I'm not lovable, I'm not
Right.
worthwhile. And they'll hold that belief system. And the events that come after that will pile up.
Mm,
It's like when you walk through the forest and you get all the burrs stuck to your pants, right? Um, it's like sticky, everything.
mm.
You put on a particular pair of glasses and you're looking through the world as I'm unlovable,
Yeah,
and
that's what
everything
you
gets
see.
categorized that way, right?
Yeah.
So, and it gets stuck to those belief systems.
Mm,
And we can have counter as we go through life. If we have a good partner, a good coach, a mentor, what have you, those can get challenged. And what we do in EMDR is really get to the core of what are those early events that set up a chain of events,
mm,
proving that you're unlovable. And we
mm,
unravel those. We clear out that box so that it's not determining each day what our reaction is today.
mm.
We want to really clear out that dandelion in the root of it, so that today's event is just today's event.
Right. So without the charge or less charge, there's something as you're speaking, you remind me of a metaphor that I learned from you. I still use like
Yeah,
every week in my work, which is of a filing cabinet,
yeah,
and we're opening a filing cabinet and we're taking one file and we're processing that file around whatever distress that's happening in the present moment to
yeah,
go back to its origins and the beliefs it built. I find this so helpful because many people think, oh, is this going to be like years and years? I don't want
yeah,
to just talk about the past forever. And this is not about flooding the person and opening every cabinet and throwing all files on the floor. Like,
yeah,
I'll be like, I don't want to do this myself. Like,
yeah, yeah. It's way too much.
it's way too much. It's very specific. It's like, what's
Mhm.
currently impacting your life? What is it? Is it reacting to something? Is it, like you said, getting a high level of distress? So let's find what the root is for this one and address it. And I
Yeah,
really love that how you are describing it. It's very specific to process.
yeah,
And so I just want to go back to you were saying about all the childhood experiences, and I guess that includes neglect. You mentioned like different treatments, but neglect is another form as well. So there's the abuse, but also neglect or not getting or not enough attention or love that also can cause.
yeah. I mean, children, we're reliant on our parents. As I was saying, as a young infant,
Mm,
you regulate by your parents. And, it's somewhere around the age of 12 that we could actually figure out how to live on our own, although, it would be difficult. But we're
right.
dependent. We're dependent as human children on our parents. And so
Mm,
there's an instinctual way that we deal with difficulty, and it's to blame ourselves.
mm,
And it's something that unconsciously involuntarily happens. Because I can't say to my parents, "You're behaving very badly. You need to
Mm.
behave differently so that I feel lovable." I mean, we just don't have the
Right.
capacity to think about that.
You're
Instinctually, I'll go, "What is wrong with me?
mm,
Something is wrong with me. They don't love me. I must be unlovable."
mm,
We don't have the capacity until we're adults to say, "Wow, my parents were really traumatized as children. They didn't have the capacity as parents. They couldn't
mm,
show up for me the way they needed to," so on and so we don't have that capacity when we're 3, when we're 5, and
right.
if we don't have good attachment and we don't have the love and the recognition and the support and so on that we need, then we start out our lives with these beliefs about ourselves that we're unlovable, that we're worthless, that we're
Mm.
bad, that so on. And then it just compiles. As you said, we
Right.
have those file cabinets where we have those sections in the library where we're getting more and more proof that we're unlovable and worthless.
Mm.
And we keep trying to resolve that, but we don't know how to resolve it because it's never been role modeled to us.
Right.
If a parent stands up for you, you come home. I love watching these Facebook videos. This little girl, and
Mm,
she's in the back, and she's saying to mom, they made fun of my hair today, and she's, "How'd you handle that?" And she goes, you could see the self esteem and the confidence in
mm.
this little tyke because she's with a loving parent. She said, "Well, I said I like my hair," and the mom's like, "Well, good for you," and so when you see those positive
Mm,
reinforcements and that support, then that child walks forward knowing they're worthwhile, knowing
mm,
they're lovable, knowing they're good, despite what's happening in the world.
mm,
But if you don't have that, then you move forward with these other beliefs. And at some
mm,
point in time, those need to be reprocessed, those need to be challenged so that we understand, wait a second, that wasn't about me. That was about a parent who had been
mm,
harmed, who didn't have the capacity. Yeah, wait a sec. I am lovable. I am worthwhile.
mm.
That didn't go very well and it harmed me. But what
Uh,
EMDR does is set that context so that we can reprocess that and it neutralizes. And then we
mm,
can move forward knowing I am worthwhile, I am lovable, I am good. We can
mm,
connect to that true self of the sun and know actually that is true. I am worthwhile, which makes it much easier to then set boundaries with other people to say,
mm.
I don't like the way you're treating me. This isn't okay with me. It's hard to do that if you don't believe you're worthwhile.
Right. So it's not only addressing the actual event or the source of a distress going back to childhood, but it's actually changing the sense of self as well. So there's identity components like I am worthless, moving to wait a minute, I am lovable. Like so it's not only addressing the event because as you're describing trauma, it's not as much as the event, even though it might have started something, but it's how it's interpreted and kept in the nervous system.
Yes.
So
Yeah, and
um,
I think at the core of ourselves, we know
mm,
that the core of ourselves is love and is a gem. But
mm,
all of the trauma on top of that questions it. So I think,
mm,
people would just give up. I often wonder sometimes, like, this instinct we have as humans to develop, to go forward, to get, uh, to move towards goodness, to move towards healing, I think is because instinctually and at our core, we know that we are love and compassion
mm,
and a gem. We can go down a road a long way where we do harm to others, as I worked with the guys in corrections.
yeah.
And it's very difficult. I had guys come into my office who really did believe that they were evil. And
Mm,
when I helped trace their history and we understood the trauma history, then they could start to separate and go, okay, wait a second. Who I am is not evil,
ah,
but I have done things to harm people. And that happened because of my trauma.
Mm,
But now I have another choice because there is the possibility of healing and shifting this. And I think when people realize, wait a second,
mm,
the core of who I am is good, then I have options for something else. It gives
mm,
hope and it gives possibility for something else to happen.
mm. See, that feels, taking accountability by creating healing. So someone recognizes, I did some action that hurt someone, whether
Mhm.
he said some folks who worked in prisons or even outside of prison, someone may say something hurtful. We're not excusing them like, oh, it's okay, because saying, that was not okay. And here's why, but here's the healing that's possible. Now that we understand why this
Yeah.
happened. So it's healing.
Yeah. One of the exercises I like to do, sometimes it happens in training, but I like to do with my clients, and perhaps it will help those who are watching this.
Hmm.
If you want to do this with me, then this is one of the exercises I like to do for people to just get in connection with their son. It's an exercise that comes from training with John Eisman. He's a Hakomi trainer, and I've modified some parts of it, but it's really about connecting experientially to what our core actually is. So you game for this?
I am. I'm up for it. Let's
Okay.
connect to that sunshine.
All right. So those watching and yourself, so just take a moment to connect to what is right now.
Mm,
Notice how you feel, and there's no changing it. It's not like meditation, it's not about going in, okay, I have to change my breath.
mhm,
Just notice what is.
mhm,
So if it helps to close the eyes, you can do that, or you can find a spot to stare at and just notice what is happening now. There's nothing to
mm,
do, nothing to change, but just noticing what is.
mhm,
And then what I want you to do is think about somebody that you love now. It can be a pet, it can be a child, somebody that you deeply love. Lots of people have the experience of, really deeply loving their pets or
mm,
their children. They know even though their child does things wrong, that they really deeply love them. So I would just want you to notice that pet or child or person that you really love. And I want you to notice in your body where you feel that. Where does that come from?
mm,
And then just check. Are you sure that you love them? Like, how sure are you? Like, are you 5%? Are you 50%? Are you like, is it true that you love them? Feel the strength of that.
mm,
So notice where you feel that in your body. Feel the strength of it. And then I want you to just let that expand. Let it expand to every cell of your body that benefits from that. Some people talk about creator or divine or great energy or whatever. When the more of that you take in, the more of it there is. So there's an abundance of this. So the more you expand it, the more it goes to your cells, the more there is. So let every cell that wants that have that.
mm.
And once every cell has had all it wants, and just enjoy that, and just in your own timing, then you can slowly come back, but just in your own timing.
Mhm.
What did you notice?
That was so. I kind of lost track. I was in a podcast. I was just, I was just going in it. It started up in the heart,
Mm,
and then felt this expansion to the body, and then to the room itself. Just felt spacious,
nice,
sense of spaciousness.
good.
Mm,
And so then I just say to my clients, that is your son.
mm,
That is the truth of who you are. And yes, sometimes there's a lot of clouds that cover over, and you're like, where is that? Am I still that?
mm,
Yes, you are always that. And what we do in EMDR and what we attempt to do in many therapies is
mhm,
to work with clearing those clouds out of the way so that people can have the experience of true self.
mm,
When you're acting from true self, there's a centeredness, a calmness, a peace about where we're coming from.
mm. It just feels so many things happen in life that cover that up, right? And unexpected things, challenges, and we're talking about trauma before and abuse, but sometimes, like, what other things cover this true self? Some people may say, "Oh, I don't have any, didn't experience abuse in childhood, but still have very negative sense of self." Like, what are other forms of trauma, just to help listeners get a wide sense of the impact of different types of trauma?
Yeah, I remember one time I was driving in Calgary, and my niece was about 4, and
Mm,
we were on a boat trail opposite of the downtown. And she looked out the window, and there were two towers in downtown Calgary that looked very similar.
mm.
She looked out the window, and she goes, "Oh, the two towers." She was referring to 9/11.
Oh.
It had impacted her at 4 years old. She had seen a news
Mm.
story, and, the news stories were quite explicit, people jumping out of the windows, and, it was quite shocking,
Yeah.
right? You don't have to have been at 9/11 in the tower, but
Right.
seeing that is traumatizing.
Mm.
Seeing the harm happening to people can be traumatizing. World injustices, going through war. Gabor Mate talks about, you know,
Mm.
the impact on him as an infant because his mother in Hungary knew the Nazis were about to come
Mm.
into Hungary. And so the threat to her life
Right.
and the threat to her community meant an anxious mother. As
Mm.
an infant, he can only regulate to her.
Right.
She's anxious. Now, she's not intending harm. She's reacting to world events.
Mm.
She's not meaning to harm him. Uh, it just is. A mother who reaches out, or a parent who reaches out to stop their child from running onto the street, might jolt the child.
Right.
A dog that rushes to a young child, and it might be the friendliest dog there is, but the child is overwhelmed.
Mm.
Um, a young child on the kindergarten Christmas concert stage, and they pee their pants out of complete anxiety and
Right.
fear, and somebody laughs at them, or they're just embarrassed, right? These aren't intentional traumas, but they
Mm.
overwhelm the system.
Right.
Flood
Mm.
in a community, or racism that you grow up with, and you go into the mall with your parents and people are following you, or they say terrible things to you.
Mm.
um, it's not necessarily that you have parents that have complex trauma, but we live in a world where things don't always go right.
Right.
um, you get goaded on by peers, so you do something that harms you physiologically or emotionally,
Mm.
or children don't always know values, or they haven't been taught things, right? Um, my nephew's father was from Africa, and
Mhm.
so he was half white, half black, and he experienced things in the schoolyard that were shocking to me, that I thought, are
Wow.
we still dealing with those things? I mean, as a young child, he's hearing things that are clearly coming from parental influence,
Right.
right? So his parents and myself were not doing anything particularly to try and traumatize his child, but he's living in a world where he's seen as other.
Mm.
Lots of different events happen to us that impact us,
Yeah.
and seeing other people's trauma also impacts us.
Mm.
So we find out in EMDR, when we do the float back and we trace to what the roots are of that dandelion, we find out what those are, and then we can clear them. That's the positive,
Mm.
and that's the thing I want people to hear the most, is not necessarily that, people can get discouraged because they're like, well, what do I do about something that happened in my childhood? Well, we have a therapy that will address that
Right.
and clear that out and neutralize it. And, my clients are shocked, they're disturbed by something for 15 years. It shifts and they're like, how can I not be disturbed by this
Right.
anymore? This is so weird,
Yes, I get that too.
right?
This is actually it's so beautiful to see that. It really is. I hear the same thing with clients, like this same memory. Like it's not like they forget the memory or we're erasing a memory. It's still there, right?
Yeah.
And but there's like I don't feel upset by it anymore. Like I don't
Yeah.
like that it happened, but there isn't the present distress from that past. And that's really powerful. Like
Mhm.
we're taking the charge from the past that's affecting the present.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when something has happened to us as children, we don't, as I was saying before, we don't have the capacity to process that. We don't have all the thoughts that we do as an adult. We can't work that out. We just blame ourselves. We do what we need to survive. We're reliant on these parents.
Mm,
So we move forward with belief systems. Sometimes our parents don't even realize that we've taken
right.
on.
Yeah.
um, I have parents that bring their children to me with phobias of different things. They don't know how it happened
Yeah.
necessarily, but we have a way to clear that out.
Mm,
Sometimes we understand it, sometimes we don't. It really depends on how early that got embedded in our system.
right.
But we do know that those early events have an impact. If your child was harmed by somebody at a very young age, then get them in to do EMDR, because we don't want, as we mentioned with the water bottle or
Yeah.
the glass, we don't want that to fill up. And there's a
Yeah.
way to keep that clear. We're working with first responders. We want to sort of catch up because they've had a lot of difficult events, maybe in childhood, but particularly in their work. So we want to clear that container out and
Mm,
then do that ongoing maintenance to clear out what's happening.
mm, mm. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to quickly thank you for stopping by and watching this content. It truly means the world to me that you're interested in creating positive change. I also want to invite you to join our amazing community. I have free events online about mindfulness, mindfulness based stress reduction, laughter, as well as retreats that you can do from the comfort of your own home. And are you ready for this? Self paced program that you can do about mindfulness and stress reduction. So you can join the newsletter below to stay up to date on all these goodies. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and press that button. It really helps me to keep this content going and reach out to more guests. Thank you so much again, and may you continue enjoying watching this episode. It's a beautiful metaphor. Like it can see it so visually. You held the glass up. It's like, okay, you can clear it up, but then things happen to fill the glass. So it's not like, as you said earlier when we began, we're just going to do one thing. It's going to take one session and everything is fixed. Like
Yeah.
sometimes people have that expectation. It's like, well, it takes a bit of time. It doesn't mean forever, but it
Yes.
takes some sessions to actually, and there isn't a magic number, but it does take some time.
What's really encouraging in EMDR is it doesn't matter if you're 20 or 70, the event's clear
Yeah.
regardless of how long it's been in the system. That's really hopeful.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to talk about, when we're talking about the subject that you mentioned, about talking about overwhelming world injustices. One
Yeah.
of the things that happened to me a couple years ago, I got scammed. He was building a shed, and the contract looked fine. He dropped some
Mhm.
materials off and then disappeared. And I took some action, which was part of, even in grief work, taking action sometimes helps us work through things.
Yes.
Last year he was convicted of several counts of fraud, and
Oh,
I
wow.
I helped in bringing people together to be able to make that happen. So that was action I could take to work with that. But I realized at one point, different injustices happening in the world, that I had this like intense, really intense distress
Mm.
and intense, like rage about injustices. And I was aware, I think because of my work and the work that I've done in terms of mindfulness work and so on,
Mm.
this is way too intense for the injustice I'm thinking about.
Mm.
What is that connected to?
Hmm.
And so I, called up my therapist and said, hey, we need to do some work with this because this is way too intense
Right.
for the situation. It's not that we shouldn't, I shouldn't be upset that I got scammed or,
Right.
I mean, other people got scammed, school got scammed, the fraud detective's father-in-law got scammed. He
Wow.
was good. He
Yeah,
was
yeah,
good at what he
yeah.
did, right? But that intensity of distress or intensity of anger or
Mm.
whatever it is, that is an indication to us that what the the current what we're looking at currently is the flower of the dandelion, but there's a
Mm.
root. And it gives us an opportunity to do the EMDR work, to do the float back, to find out what that root is, to clear it out so that intensity is not there.
Mm.
So we can go, yeah, that's not a good experience. Nobody likes to be scammed. And I just did an article. It's just I set up a website for learning how to not be scammed. I like to take action on things, and
Mhm.
it's a good way to work through stuff. But I still needed to find the work to find what is that core root. And there were some injustices
Mm.
in my early life where I couldn't get heard or I couldn't get this worked out.
Ah,
And so when you clear those early pieces, it makes that dandelion fall apart. Or,
yeah.
like I use the metaphor of the spider web, if we clear that main string and get that to unravel, the rest unravels. And
Mm.
so the intensity that we feel about something gives us indication there's an early root.
Mm.
And fortunately, there's a way to deal with that.
Right. Which really feels empowering, especially in this day and age. There's a lot of things that are happening in the world that may
Yeah.
leave us feel hopeless or disempowered, including, politicians making
Yeah.
decisions that appear they're going against human rights
Yes.
or supporting injustices. And there's a lot of anger that's happening and a lot of upsetness. And this doesn't mean we don't get upset or
No.
don't say this is unjust or incorrect. But I guess what you're saying is how much it affects us, that we can manage, because then it may lead us to like not good action. Like if we're completely distressed and we're spending our time agitated and watching more news and watching more news,
Yes.
that's all we talk about. How does that help us?
Right. It becomes a ball. I mean,
Yeah.
we're living in a world of algorithms now. So if you spend a lot of time on Facebook or whatever your social media is, on those really negative accounts, it's going to send you more
Yeah.
versus babies laughing and human rights activists who've accomplished great things,
Hmm.
or the latest amnesty action that released a human rights person who is about to be killed, or there
Right.
are really positive stories, but we can end up in a negative feedback loop where our algorithms and our social media feed us
Mm.
even more negative. And it's not that we, like you said, it's not that we deny what a world injustice might be. It's not
Mm.
that we deny somebody is taking action to reduce human rights and that we need to do something about it. It's not about that. But if
Right.
we are frozen or in so much distress that we can't get out of bed or that
Mm.
we are overeating or watching, Netflix for hours on end, or we're doing everything possible to avoid the intensity of distress we're feeling, which makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
We
It's
don't know
it's
what to
a form
do
of
about it.
coping, like we're trying to cope, not helpful, but that's how people
Yeah, yeah, we're
try to
trying to keep
cope.
our head
Yeah.
above water. There's a way,
Mhm.
in EMDR that we can get to those roots so the distress isn't so intense
Yeah.
that we can't take action. And
Mm.
action, you know, maybe we can't be on the world front to fight on the forefront. We all have different action that we have to take. And if we're in deep distress, that first action might be the oxygen mask on ourselves,
Right.
the self care that we need to get our head above water,
Mm.
right? The EMDR can help get to the roots, but we also need to consider things like, okay, if the algorithm is feeding me more and more negative,
Yeah.
scroll past that negative report very quickly and hang out on the baby laughing because that's what you're going to get more of then,
Yeah.
right? And I used to do this exercise with my guys in corrections.
Mhm.
They would come in, they were, heavy, and there was a lot difficulty happening to them.
Mm.
And I would just say, people can do this exercise right now. You
Mhm.
can do this too. If you just look around the room right now, I'll give you 10 seconds. I want you to count as many squares as you can see. All right? So I'll give you 10 seconds. Go. Okay. What do you got?
I got, yoga block,
Okay,
uh
just the number of them.
number of them. I think I have 5?
Okay. All right. All right. So I'll give you another 10 seconds
Yeah,
and you can just count like, like one, two. Okay. So, but
yeah.
go from five, some more squares. I want you to look for
Oh,
more squares.
more, okay,
More squares. Okay. 10 seconds. Go.
okay.
Okay. What do you
Okay,
got?
4 more.
Okay. All right. So we're up to nine. So we could keep doing this. And the more time I gave you, the more squares you would see.
Yes.
Right? Now, without looking around, just off the top of your head, how many circles are in the room?
Ugh,
You don't know.
uh,
That's not what you were looking for.
yeah.
Right, right. So I would say to my clients, I'd say, well, if you're looking for squares, that is what you see.
Yeah,
The difficulty in our culture is that news is all about sensation. It's about keeping viewers.
yeah.
It's negative. And so we have to make a point of seeking out the circles, of looking
Mm,
for you can go online and there's a good news network,
mm.
right? If you like the algorithms, I say in your social media, if you take time, you can actually go into Facebook and search baby laughing and videos will
It will
pop up.
pop up, yeah,
Babies
yeah.
laughing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a great way to start your day. Because it's hard not to laugh with these little ones laughing, right? Things like The Book of Joy. I
Mm,
love that book. And there's a movie out. It's called Finding, let's see. The movie is in Netflix. It's called Mission Joy Finding Happiness in Troubled Times. I
mm,
think I got that right. Anyways, it's the ebook or the audio book of The Book of Joy is the best. It's the
mm.
Dalai Lama. Um, and Desmond Tutu talking to each other, and they're
Mm,
quite playful. These are two men who have seen a lot of
mm,
terrible things in their lifetimes. Okay. So it's not like they're just, they were born in richness and
Right.
have easy lives. I mean, they've both seen horrific things in their lives
Mm.
and they're laughing. They have great hope for humanity and for the world. And it's
Yeah.
to hear them in the audiobook or to watch the film, I think is really positive. Right,
Mm.
so to take in things like that, to it's like of your diet, you don't wanna eat just junk
Right.
food, right? You need some vegetables once in a while, you need some good stuff.
Mm.
So, the Book of Joy or the Book of Hope, which was written by Jane Goodall, and she also has
Mm.
a film out, it was in the IMAX here, and it's, let's see, so the Book of Hope, A Survival Guide to Trying Times, and
Mm.
then the film was called Jane Goodall, Reasons for Hope. And she
Beautiful.
talks about, climate change, and she talks about several species who've been brought back from the brink of
Mm.
being gone, it's a really hopeful movie, and it gives you
Yeah.
the sense, hey, as a collective human beings across the planet, we can do amazing things. We have created amazing things. I mean, I think about my grandmother when she was born in 1913, the amount of things she saw invented in her lifetime were incredible.
Right.
When she was born, there were no automobiles and planes. That she lived in a sod house in the prairies of Alberta. I
Mm.
mean, the miraculous things she saw in her lifetime were just incredible. 2 world wars, and I mean, it's
Mm.
just somebody on the moon.
Right.
If we can do that, we can certainly figure out what to do about the climate that's changed and
Mm.
work with this, right? We are incredible human beings when we work together, and that's really what the movie is about, are some of those species that have
Mm.
been brought back. I like to listen to Pema Chodron in the morning.
Mm.
Very encouraging, and one of the I like to listen to audiobooks because I like
Yeah,
to
same
hear
here.
their
Yeah,
voices
yeah.
and their intonation and so on. One of the ones I listen to is When Pain is the Doorway.
Mm.
Very encouraging, how to work with difficult emotions
Mm.
rather than the avoidance or the compartmentalizing or the burying. Because
Mm.
when we walk through it, we get to the other side. We find hope and we can release.
Mm. So inspiring what you're sharing and very empowering because what you're saying as well is what's good and what's bad, they're both available.
Yes.
And we're acknowledging the bad things, but let's also choose to consume some of the good things, whether social media or like, the metaphor of junk food,
Yeah.
like the junk food of news or the junk food of, it's very addictive and if, can easily just get caught in it.
And it's not about not being informed. I'm not
Right.
saying, bury your heads and never, don't pay attention. It's not about that at all. And there is an acknowledgement we
Mm.
need to do about people's distress and difficulty. If you've been dealing with racism or homophobia or the changes politically in the US now against
Mm.
transgender individuals, is really disturbing and
Yeah.
distressing. And, I never want to negate that transgender individuals in the US
Yeah.
are facing threat to life.
Right.
That's it's not about ignoring that at all.
No.
While we also, we want to reduce what's in this glass
Yeah.
so that we can deal with the now without intense distress or not being able to get out of bed or
Right.
so much anxiety that we don't know what to do, right? Being able to digest and take care of ourselves with good. And I think that's
Mm.
why, when we listen to something like the Book of Joy, when we listen to two individuals, they're authentic, integral,
Mhm.
and they've dealt with difficult stuff. It's
Yeah.
not somebody just saying, "Okay, be happy, be
Yeah,
positive."
that's a toxic positivity. Everything is great, will work out, everything's wonderful. It's like, well
It's just another way to avoid
Yeah, yeah.
the distress that we're trying, that we're experiencing. For me, one of the things that helps me too is exercise. I love being in
Mm,
nature. My pups love being out in nature and just taking in that fresh air and
yeah,
being with the trees just clears the system for a little while. It
yeah.
doesn't take care of world justice, but it anchors me, helps me reduce stress so that I can cope with the next thing that needs to be addressed.
Mhm.
That digesting nature is critical for me to
Yeah.
keep my health.
It's interesting. I've had a couple conversations about that in this podcast, and it has left me with the sense of actually taking care of ourselves or
Mhm.
practicing, whether it's mindfulness or anything can support us, is actually a form of activism. It's
Yes.
got a deep rooted way. We're addressing our own communities, our own circles, beginning with our self. Like that's
Yeah.
a form of activism. Like that's empowering ourselves from the ground up and see if we can take any other action in supporting someone else. So it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be this massive, grandiose change the world. Like we got to change us. We got to address our own suffering.
Yeah. The more that we clear out this
Yeah.
glass, the less chance we're in an apathetic, distressed
Yeah.
place. And it's not that I don't have times of distress. That's not the point.
Right.
It's just when it's so intense, I know it's connected to this. It doesn't mean that I don't feel a lot of intensity or distress about some of the political changes
Right.
and the anti-human right
Yeah.
movements. But like you said, we need to take care of ourselves so that we're filled with strength and we're filled with the things that we need for self-care so that
Mm.
we can take action. And even just noticing the circles and the squares,
Right.
that
It's a
I
great. I
was
love that one.
yeah, I was walking yesterday with the dogs out hiking, and we were up on this hill where you can see it's just absolutely incredibly beautiful.
Mm.
And there were other people coming up and we're chatting. And I was reminded, that, yeah, as I walk, and then there's somebody coming and they have a dog. I say, is your dog friendly? Yep, good. Thanks for asking. The dogs play. We have
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I'm reminded, most of the people I run into and most of the dogs I run into are friendly.
Good
There's
people. Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of lovely people out here. There are the majority of people that we run into are good-hearted, kind, want
Mm.
good for other people. That's the majority of people, but we at a physiological level, we have this instinct when one negative thing happens, we're running that in our mind for the rest of the day and not the 90% of good. So we have to watch that. It doesn't take away the injustices, it doesn't take away the wrongs,
Mm.
but we wanna make sure we have a diet of good that encourages us and gives us hope and helps us to cope with what is unjust.
This feels like we may have a new book title, A Diet of Hope.
Yeah, that's a good one. You can put all the ideas that come out of all of these podcasts in it.
That's right, the diet of hope. Like there's something we can do. This has been so enjoyable and enriching. And I wonder, I have two more questions for you, if it's okay.
Yeah.
And one of them is very a kind of a technical thing that sometimes people get curious about with EMDR,
Mm,
which is like, oh, you do eye movements or what's called bilateral stimulation, and people think like, is this hypnosis? Like, what is this? What, I got a therapist, waving their finger in front of my face, or if it's online, it's like a software with something moving. Does this work? And sometimes people wonder, like, what is this eye movement stuff in
yeah.
EMDR or eye movement desensitization or reprocessing?
Well, honestly, they're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, yeah.
Really, I've been to some of those neuroscience talks and go away going, "Woo, what was that all about?" But I think simply, we are all designed
Mm,
to wanna go towards healing and health. I think just naturally that's what we want to do. If we give the right conditions for that to happen, our systems will move towards health.
Mm.
If you aren't getting enough vitamin C, you'll get symptoms of scurvy. If I give you a bunch of vitamin C, your body just wants to go towards health,
Right.
right? So I think, in terms of the eye movements and what EMDR is doing, part of it is getting to the root, shaking some of that stuff loose and allowing
Mm.
it to neutralize at a time where
Mm.
we are not overwhelmed and we're not in trauma. We have the ability to sort
Mm.
of digest that in a way that's more adaptive. And what helps with that is dual attention or mindfulness,
Right.
connecting into that, but also being in present moment. So
Mm.
the system isn't overwhelmed and it's able to then digest that in an adaptive way that it can't do when you're in the midst of trauma.
Right.
Or you're a young child and you don't have the capacity to understand what's all
Mm.
happening and know it's not about you. Scientifically, it might be a bit like REM sleep, but we know it certainly has components of dual attention,
Mhm.
mindfulness, taxing the working memory, so
Right.
that basically that we can digest this and make it adaptive.
Mhm.
Um, and it just gives the opportunity for that to happen while also getting to that root so that it's completely neutralized. We're not just learning coping mechanisms.
Mhm. It's actually really powerful what you're naming, the dual attention, because sometimes when people begin that, they're like, "Oh, wait," and they just wanna go to they're not even moving their eyes. They wanna get fixated on the image of the past, and then I remind them, "Oh, just moving the eyes," and something begins to happen as they're moving the eyes. It's like you said, the dual attention, it becomes, the system not as dysregulated, like it's there, it's as if watching a movie, but connecting to the feelings, the sensations, the thoughts. Um, it's quite amazing, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
In the context
yeah.
of, a good therapeutic alliance with a therapist that you feel comfortable with, that you feel like you can say what you need to say, that's
Mm,
warm, empathic, non-judgmental, non-pathological, they're not
right.
blaming you for things or telling you just, get with it. It would
Yeah, yeah.
in the context of a good relationship, it sets the container for that processing and that
Mm,
self-discovery and reprocessing things to adaptive, positive, and neutral. And well, not necessarily always do people come out of it feeling elated.
right.
It just might be neutralized
Yeah,
and just, well, that's just not important to me anymore.
yeah. Which is quite a drastic difference than distress, 10 out of 10.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And the last thing I'm curious about, I ask all my guests. The name of a podcast is Pause to Elevate, and you clearly do so many things that support elevating yourself and those around you. But what comes up for you in terms of what is pausing to elevate? What does that mean for you? How has pausing helped you to elevate?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is being in present moment. And there's lots of people who've worked with this, of course, for centuries in terms of mindfulness.
Yeah.
But when I'm in present moment, and I listen to people like Muji and Gangaji, and
Mm,
oh, there's so many that deal with this. But sometimes I just stop and I say, "Am I okay right now, right in this moment? Are
mm,
things okay right now?" Yeah,
mm,
yeah. Right now, right here, it's okay.
right.
So I think, if I think about pause to elevate, that just takes me to the truth of
Mm,
now. And the more I think we do that to be in present time can help us to cope. I think about those who are really distressed,
mm,
and that I think we need to reach out. If that's the place that you're in, you need to reach out for support
yeah.
because that's not your fault. It's a whole container that is not your fault. It's full, and you deserve to have the support to clear
Mm,
that out.
mm.
So it's not as simple as just, okay, just be in the moment right now. Let's
Right, right.
If
They
this
need.
is overflowing, then get some support for that,
Yeah.
right? Get the support that you need so that you can make the choices in terms of self-care and that digesting of positive, because
Mm,
for some people in intense distress, we're not meant as humans to do this all by ourselves.
yeah.
And I think there's a fallacy of individualism that somehow that if you just think hard enough, if you just manifest right, if you work hard enough, that you should be able to overcome. And, frankly, sometimes this glass full is not your fault. And whether you've contributed to it or not, you deserve to have the support to clear that out so that
Mm,
you can make choices that then enliven you from there forward.
mm.
So I never want to negate that and make it so
Right.
sound so simple that, well, if you just do X, Y, and Z,
Here's the five
well,
things. Yeah, yeah.
you can overcome all in world injustice. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
that simple, right?
Do these two things and it's all over. Yeah, it's all great.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
No, no, no.
Yeah,
Uh,
there are things that help,
Yeah.
It
Mm,
is helpful, like your Laughology podcast. I always thought it was great,
yeah.
It is helpful to laugh, right?
Mm,
If you're so distressed and this is overwhelming, let's clear that out so that
yeah.
you can laugh. You can
Right.
find your laughter again.
Yeah.
Right? Um,
Mm,
so, yeah, I wanna balance that out, that I don't want
yeah.
anything to sound so simple that, when people are really distressed by what's happening in the world right now, that they don't say, well, then they add on top of themselves, "Well, why can't I do this?"
Yeah. How
Well,
come I
what
haven't
is wrong with
resolved
you if
it?
you can't do
Yeah.
this either?
Yeah.
Yeah, that just adds to the distress.
Yeah. So beautifully shared. And I've so deeply enjoyed all these moments in this conversation, truly. And, on and off podcasts, you really are a heart centered, deeply caring, loving human being. And truly
Right.
such a pleasure to have known you from the first place and to share this. And really thank you for all the outstanding work you do. And even taking the time in being here in this podcast to speak about this work and to raise awareness about this work. Really appreciate you. And I'm wondering, where can people find you? And I'll put in the show notes. It's your website, or what's the best way for people if they want to learn more about your work or trainings?
Yeah, if they just Google my name, they'll find my website. And I'm, working on a new website to get more out there so that people can sort of do the on demand, where I don't have to be
Yeah.
live, but I can disseminate some of that information and encouraging.
Hmm.
Yeah. And, encourage people to listen to the Book of Joy, listen to the Book of Hope. Um, there's a movie called Happy. It's an older movie, but it's lovely. It talks about, you know, just the basics of what people around the world that are happy, that don't have the things that we think we should
Yeah.
have to be happy, right? So they're taking those pieces as well,
Mm,
and one step at a time. Pick
mm,
one thing that will add to your life positively.
mm.
Go from there.
Words of wisdom. Thank you again so much for your time. And I really want to thank all the listeners. If you're watching on YouTube or listening to this audio, thank you so much for listening. And if you found this useful and helpful, feel free to share, like, and subscribe if you haven't. May your moments be filled with ease and may you be present in as many of them. Thank you. Hello there, and thank you so much for stopping by this channel. I hope you find this content useful, and if you do, feel free to hit that subscribe button. It will really help me to reach to more people and keep this content going. Here we are journeying together, and let's see where this takes us.